you so much for being here today. It's such a, I'm so happy to, sorry, now I have to do the official blurb part. So WBCSD, antitrust is very important to us. We offer a pre-competitive space. So please avoid discussing any of the subjects that you see listed on the screen here now. And if you are concerned about anything that is discussed, please do let my boss know, Tom Williams. Yes, great. Okay, that's that part out of the way. So yes, we are recording this session. We are trying to make it as interactive as possible. So you are invited to use the chat as much as you like. You can take advantage of this virtual world and whisper on the side. We are making slides available and the recording available afterwards, plus other products. And I should say, like in terms of videos, there's absolutely no requirement to have your video on. I think in this day and age, we're all very Zoom fatigue at the end of the year. So best practice actually is you can turn it off. And if you're speaking, then turn it back on again. But you are welcome to turn your videos off if you're not speaking. So as I said, I'm so excited. I left out of bed at 6 a.m. this morning. I was so excited for today. We have been on a journey at WBCSD, and not just in WBCSD, but with our member companies and other stakeholders. It was just about 6 months ago, just over 6 months ago, that the global goal for nature was published. And I'm going to come on to that a bit later. And then straight away, our member companies at WBCSD are like, so what's that then? What does nature positive mean for us? How does that build on what we're doing already? How can we, how is this the same? How is this different? And so we realized, well, we couldn't answer that question on our own. We went on a learning journey. And that, started in June. We had some surveys and then some virtual dialogue facilitated by Rios partners. We went back out over the European summer, more surveys and refining and testing and honing these building blocks. So we are not defining nature positive. That's not our role. Actually, SBTN are doing some great work behind the scenes to get that done. In the meantime, we've come up with some building blocks to help companies understand the implications of the global goal for nature based on frameworks that they're already familiar with. And so, that was 6 months ago. 1 month ago, literally exactly to the day today, we released the one-pager, this infographic that we're calling on nature positive. As I said, these blocks that companies are already familiar with. That was in COP26 at Glasgow. And that session, we talked about the origins of the global goal for nature. We had companies speaking about how this means to them. This is not that event today, right? So if you're interested in that, go to the recording. The links are in the slides when you get them. But no, today really the idea is that I don't want to call it a training session, but I feel it kind of is a little bit like a training session because everybody's talking about nature positive now, right? And there's a danger that if we don't use nature positive in a coherent and consistent way, then the credibility of the term is going to be devalued, and a bit like what we're seeing with net zero. So the idea really was to be very proactive in this and name some of those big challenges that we understood up front, so we get a shared understanding of it. And so that you that are on this call here to now, gosh, I see there's nearly 80 of us here. There are 80 of us here now. It's up to us all now to go out and use nature positive in a coherent and consistent way. So we don't create more confusion. What we do is we can inspire more action with business. And so presumably you're all here because you're in a business or you're working with a business. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you're going to understand where this nature positive and this global goal and what it means for business does build on what our business has been doing already for decades, actually, but goes further than what we've been doing so far. You can see how the different building blocks fit together, the initiatives that link, that really form the basis of these building blocks. And we've got representatives from many of them here today. And so that at the end, you feel more confident, because it's not enough just me being able to present nature positive. It's basically, you should all be willing and able to talk about nature positive when you're asked by your boss, by your client, by your colleague. And then also, because their journey doesn't end here, so you also get a sense of what's happening next and how you can get involved, but how also you can take these steps further for yourself as well. So in terms of the agenda, so we'll just wrap up the introduction here now as well to get a sense of who you are. Then I will go through the building blocks. Now, hopefully in the chat box, which I don't have open right now, You will, there we go. Yes, thanks, Maria. So yeah, big team of us behind the scenes supporting you all here today. So Maria shared in the chat box our link to our literally hot off the press, and I'm not lying when we got the final iterations done literally 2 hours ago. So you can download the building block document there now, and I'm literally going to walk you through the document. It won't be slides, I will walk you through the document so you see the different parts of it and the key messages that underpin it. And pay attention, because then there'll be a quiz, and there will, and we'll be able to see actually who is the winner of that quiz. So that's really short. That'll be about kind of 20 minutes. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, you get to dive into the building blocks where you feel, do you know what? I don't really get that one. I've got questions. And really the space we want to prepare here is a very safe space. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Somebody is going to ask, what is the difference between nature and biodiversity? That's not a stupid question. So many people have been asking that question. And we hope through these building blocks, you get a sense of, I get it now, right? There's going to be loads of other questions. So every single question you have on that, as I'm presenting, note that down. So either, print it if you're old school like me, or bring it up on your screen and actually start typing some notes or some stickies onto the document. So as I'm presenting, you also start thinking about, what does this mean for me? How would I say it if I was speaking to my client, my colleague, etc.? So we use those breakout rooms. You get a chance to speak to the experts of those frameworks that underpin those particular building blocks. And then, the last part, we'll have a practice time, because we know practice makes perfect. And actually we'll break you out into pairs to get a chance to practice and actually explain nature positive to a business of your choice in your mind in 5 minutes. Get some feedback, and the other's going to do that back for you as well. So your challenge will be, at the end, you can talk about nature positive within 5 minutes, and then wrap up on next steps. And so with that, I should just say, obviously, this is not your typical launch event. You're going to get the most out of it the more that you put into it. So really do encourage active listening. I say there will be a quiz. There's a reason we put it in there, because it really helps your learning. Take notes, it really helps your learning. And yeah, do be ready for those breakouts. If there's any reason it doesn't work for you, that's also fine. We will be recording the different parts of the sessions as well and making those available. And then, so download the guide already and take notes. So it really kind of helps ground your learning on this as well. But firstly, let's hear from you. So I'd love to know who's here now. Obviously, we can't have all 88 of you say hello. So we're going to go to Mentee Meter now. So Maria is going to help us bring up the Mentee now. And we're going to ask you just a few series of questions before then I start sharing more on the document. So what group best describes the organization that you represent today? So there's 35 of you that have got in there already. I'm amazed. It's really great. So there's about half of you that voted there now. So please get out your phones, mentee.com. And the code 35562177 is at the top. So who do we have here? So we've quite a lot of business, as we'd expect. Quite a few NGOs as well. I guess you're here because you're working with business. Actually, when I was at IECM before, that was my favorite topic, like how can NGOs best engage with business, speaking the language of business. So this is a great start. Consultancies and business associations. We know we've got a lot of global network partners here across WB Cities Global Network. So really great to have you here. I know there's some other associations here as well. I saw IPECA on the list and others. And the others, I'm curious who you are. Okay, great. Nobody from finance. That's fine. We did target this specifically at business, but maybe we could imagine an iteration of this with our finance folks as well. Okay, great. Okay, let's go to the next question then. So if your boss, your colleague, your client came to you right now and said, what does this nature positive mean? Like, what does that mean for my business? How confident would you feel right now that you could explain what it was? And this is an important question because we're going to come back to this question at the end of the session. So yeah, most of you are not confident. Some of you are somewhat confident. Exactly. I guess our experts are filling this in if you're the very confident ones. That's perfect. I'm very confident. This is good. So those of you who have said confident and very confident as well, brilliant to see. I should say when we go to the breakout rooms, yes, we put the expert on the spot in terms of having the answer to the questions, but there will be discussions around this as well. So yeah, please do feel free to share your voice. But those of you who are, yeah, not confident and somewhat confident, the challenge I have accepted is that by the end of the session, you will definitely feel more confident. So let's see that. All right, moving on. And again, in the spirit of very active learning, you've surely come here with a specific question, a specific situation, specific challenge. And I invite you to think about that context, that challenge, that question, and share it with us now. And it's again, it's a way of thinking, how are you going to use this afterwards? Because I would hate for you just to go, you know, you download the PDF and then that's it, nothing ever happens. What are you going to do with this? It's like, yeah, you want some clarity. You've got some challenging questions. You want to communicate better. Okay, look, you want more clarity. Good. Alignment. Yes. Oh, I hear this a lot. How are we aligning? How is this not something else? We're really trying to, with the guests we have today, we're trying to show you how the different initiatives are going to come together to help us get towards this nature positive world. Some new arguments. Okay, I'm not sure about that. Let's see if we can, at least some, yeah, ways of explaining things might help. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in terms of general barriers, I think this lack of clarity and a bit of paralysis that kicks in, I hear so much, and especially the We Value Nature campaign, they, you know, this is something that they've been diving into as well. So really, this is not just a technical issue, we're also back to the communications and education side as well. Okay, so yeah, keep those in mind. Oh, as I now try to share the document. Great, thank you. So hopefully you've had a chance to click on the link that Maria sent to get you to the document that we've launched just today, and I'm not on the right page. So what does nature positive mean for business? So I have deliberately we've not put this in slides. I'm walking you through a PDF. Clearly, I don't recommend that you present like the slides, the text I'm going through as a PowerPoint, but you could take elements from it. I should say that, but it is in this format, and we're super grateful for the comms team in WBCSD, because one of the things we heard from our business members is like, you know, I don't have time to read reports. No, none of my colleagues read the reports that I send them, but everybody can flick through a deck. So what we've tried to do is to help you develop something that could be flicked through like a deck, even if it isn't a PowerPoint deck. And again, the idea is that what we've done is we've brought together the resources that are existing already in a way to help us understand nature positive. And it's supposed to be like, as Tom, our director of the Nature Action work, he said, like, we're trying to get people to come into the shallow end of the swimming pool. We're encouraging you into the shallow end of the swimming pool so that then you're ready to go into the deeper end of diving into the SBTN initial guidance or the TNFD scoping when it's available. Okay, so this is the idea that this is our intermediate step that you can use for yourself, but also for your colleagues as well. So going through, so there's three main sections. We start with like just, yeah, this global goal for nature. You know, where did it come from, the origins behind it? I'm not going into that today. I think you can look at the recording from Glasgow for that. Really good story starting in Davos. We're going to look at the elements of the global goal. And then we've also identified other initiatives that are addressing parts of that nature positive challenge and what they're doing about it. And then particularly highlighted the Convention on Biological Diversity. So that's really the first part, but I'm not going to dive so much into that today. The meat of it is then in what does nature positive mean for business? And so you can see the different links. We talk about nature and climate as well, the links between nature and climate. And then we go into more detail of these particular building blocks, and then just a sense of, you know, where do we all go next with this? And I should say the challenge I've set myself is to do this in 10 minutes. You have 5 minutes later to do it. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail. And then we do have a quiz, so pay attention. So this global goal for nature, this new beacon, not a North Star, because it's not very Southern Hemisphere inclusive. We talk about why it's needed and where this term of like bending the curve. And so these are graphs we've taken from our Vision 2050 report, which obviously are referencing others. You see, they're all going in the wrong direction. And so it's a recognition that despite years and decades of work, especially around biodiversity and nature and climate change, the curves are still going in the wrong way. So how do we bend the curve? And this is where that term comes from. And so the launch of the global goal for nature, which Gavin Edwards can speak about much more in Breakout Group 2, is the idea of halting and reversing the loss of nature. So this was a key moment for me when I was also on this learning journey. It's about how do we stop the loss? How do we halt it? And because of the historical loss, how do we get to this full recovery by 2050? We need to reverse it. And so this is where the interim goals of net zero from 2020 and net positive by 2030, they come from. In essence, if somebody had to say, well, what does this mean? What we're practically saying is we need more nature by 2030 than in 2020. And yes, I know the devil is in the detail in terms of quality and what nature, but again, this is a high level. If you need somebody to understand it, we need more nature by 2030 than in 2020. So here's where we list the other initiatives and say these are going to be, they're here today with us now. So the Science Based Targets Network, the Capitals Coalition, Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, Business for Nature are all here today. I'm super grateful for that. So they will be available to you in the breakout rooms later, the CBD. And so then, yeah, what does nature positive mean for business? Well, we kind of have to start with what is nature and why is it important for business? And so we pulled out some of the language from the IPBES studies, which was picked up by SBTN, and some words that resonated with the group, the stakeholder group that went through this dialogue process. You know, it's understanding that it's all living entities and their interactions with other living and non-living entities and processes. And it's like, oh, right, when you say living, we start recognizing that biodiversity then is that living component and reflecting the health and resilience across Earth systems. But then realms come in, right? I've heard of realms before, right? You're thinking, so the global goal, the global commons are those resources that we all need to survive. And they include various realms of land, freshwater, oceans, and climate. So within that, you've got the interaction. So we've got a graph that we developed to try to show those links that biodiversity does not equal nature. And why it's important? Well, because it underpins, you know, society and therefore the economy, and some key references that we've listed here, including the Disruptive Review, the World Economic Forum's a great new nature economy report series, etc. So again, there's some key resources to go to. Links between nature and climate, while we have to talk about them together, it came out loud and clearly in COP26, but climate change is one of the main pressures for the loss of nature, and loss of nature is also driving climate change. And so this vicious circle we have to turn into a virtuous circle. And so as we get into the building blocks, again, it's just to reiterate that the steps that we pulled out, they're not new. There's assess and prioritize, the commit, the measure and value, etc. They're familiar to companies. When you ask them, they kind of follow those steps anyway. A lot of them were brought together under the Natural Capital Protocol. And then the SBTN, they picked that up in their initial guidance and took it a step further. But these steps make sense. And the Capitals Coalition now have a really cool infographic, which we don't have in this guide, but show how they fit together then with financial institutions and governments. So the steps, they say these headlines aren't new. What's new is, well, if those steps were like, okay, what do we need to do? But we didn't have how much. And so the global goal has come in and tried to give a sense of direction of how much. SBTN are going to work on the specifics in terms of the specific contributions in different eco-regions, etc. But in the meantime, what we've done is with these key messages is highlighted the how much is needed for these different steps. So hopefully you're still with me. This is where the quiz questions will start kicking in. So that first one, assess and prioritize. So the keywords here, so in green are always the key message. If there's one message to take away, it's in green. So assess the realms of nature that are potentially relevant to your operations and the value chain, and prioritize those impacts, dependencies, and opportunities for regeneration. And so keywords in there are that it's not then just about, you know, species. We need to think holistically, think about all elements, but now you're saying, oh my goodness, but that's overwhelming, that's too much. That's where the prioritization comes in as well. And that's why SBTN has got some great guidance, and join Breakout Group 1 if you want to go into this further, where they say, given the sector that you're in and the value chain place that you're in, these are probably your material issues that you need to consider, and now kind of justify why or why not you're considering these. And so at the moment, we know most companies are not looking at oceans, and that's fine. We're all in this learning journey together. A lot of companies in WBCC are looking at fresh water. a bit on land, but not on oceans. But that doesn't mean oceans aren't important, right? So we need to think, start expecting that there could be impacts and dependencies, and then prioritize. So here's that graphic. We had a go at trying to pull it together, how the different terms come together. So nature, freshwater, land, oceans are these realms. We got the living realms as well, with ecosystem, species, and genes, the dotted lines between them, because we can think about the different habitats and how they cross over, but just how you can see the different relationships between the terms, how they come together, they combine to provide ecosystem services, which underpin biosphere, etc., blah, blah, blah. So these are just some key graphics. Sorry, I didn't mean to do blah, blah, blah. These are some key graphics that we feel like might help to explain others, oh, this is why it's important. And to commit, so the keywords here, so a company then should set a baseline and commit to ambitious, time-bound, science-informed goals and targets to both halt and reverse the loss of nature. And I think here that it's goals, it's not just necessarily one goal. The baseline is important too. So 2020 seems to be a standard one, but as SBTN would say, it's when you can get your best data, but setting a goal without a baseline is kind of hard to measure, especially if you want to get into this science-based targets. This will be important. And the ambitious part is what we interpret as WBCSD anyway, is that we see goals that typically start in that halting and avoiding space, and that's really important. And we also need to think about minimizing and sustainable practices, but also the reversing is increasingly important. This new area of restoration and ultimately regeneration. So ambitious means also thinking, not just in one realm linked to fresh water, thinking about all the realms that are relevant to you, and then making goals and targets that are relevant to the impacts that you have and the dependencies. Which gets us actually a nice segue into measure and value. And of course, they're all related, right? And so in this case, we want business to use validated, interrelated indicators to measure nature outcomes to inform decision-making. And there's so many important words in that short little that sentence, but the point is, this is not about one indicator on nature, but there's a series of indicators that can come together to tell that story of how you set targets that meet your that match your goals, that you are then, your company responses then help to reduce the pressures on nature that we talked about earlier, which then improve the state of nature and biodiversity, and then benefits then for the business and broader society as well, which can then feed back into company responses. And this pressure state benefit response is a common model that IUCN pulled out in their IUCN guidelines for corporate biodiversity performance. And it's a mini theory of change, if you think about it. And so this is where a company often starts with that. They start talking about their actions that they're taking. And then as they get more buy-in, more money for monitoring, you can start measuring pressures, ultimately contributing to information state of biodiversity. And then that valuation piece is important to inform decision-making. So measurement on its own doesn't tell us anything. We have to translate it. And that translation can happen on different levels. And so just pulling out some key language we took from the Capitals Coalition here is that, that valuation, it can be quantitative or qualitative or monetary, depending on the context. And of course, there's provisos that go with it. That's a key message there. And to act, I want to systematically apply the mitigation hierarchy within and beyond operations to reduce pressures and have positive contributions across value chains. So again, lots of big words here. Mitigation hierarchy is very familiar to business, so keep using that. But where we often think about it is in terms of site level, especially when it comes to nature. We need to think across, the operations and the value chain. And so this is where it links very closely to the transform building block that will come next. But this is not just about site. There are actions that you can take at a product level, at a business model level, that can maybe not just avoid impacts or reduce, but also maybe restore depending on how they're sourced, especially if we think about the green economy and the bio-based green economy, etc. So it's to get away from this idea of just site-based, but thinking about how these different interventions about avoiding and reducing, restoring and regenerating can be applied at different levels of the system. And actually, the stakeholder group that we worked with, they said that transform piece is so important. Please bring that out. So this is not, it's act and transform. Oh, please go on mute. So the idea is to hear the key message to business. is to collaborate then to achieve nature positive outcomes across all spheres of control and influence. And so this diagram that we built on from SBTN is to get you to think again, site, product, and corporate, as well as value chain adjacent areas. And then those broader systems, which are like those national and global level policies, for example. So that, and again, if you think about how connected we are along value chains, you start realizing that, can you do this on your own as one single company? Probably not. Can a single company be nature positive on their own? Probably not, okay, depending on how integrated they are. But this collaboration is going to be important to get to nature positive. And so again, some examples in here. And finally, disclose and report. And actually in our diagram, we have it across all of them because it's, yeah, obviously it's not just comes at the end. It's, we hear the key message is be prepared to disclose the material nature related information because it's coming. We know that on climate, the TCFD exists. TNFD was launched earlier this summer. We've got Felipe here who will be in Breakout Group 5 later to talk more about this. And the idea here is that there's different elements to be aware of and how they link into those building blocks. So around governance and strategy and risk and the KPIs that go along with it as well. Whew. So in terms of the idea was to have like very strong foundational building blocks. So then we can, now the devil is in the detail, to go into different sectoral groups. And there we've taken, the analysis of the World Economic Forum and BCG. So these are the ones that we're going to start diving more into. But you can imagine applying this at a country context, for example, or a specific value chain that makes sense in your particular region, and trying to go through these and say, what does this mean for us? Whew. And just to acknowledge all the individuals that were involved in this journey. Well, actually, some of the individuals and the companies that were involved here as well, because there was more than 100 individuals. There's too many to list here, but just to thank you. So I'm going to take a pause, and I want to come to this quiz now to make sure to see how much you've captured. And we're a few minutes behind, but we will take time to go through this quiz now to make sure you're still with us. I haven't seen lots going in the chat box, but I'm looking forward to diving into that a bit later. So there's comments in the chat. I should also say, like, if you're, Maria, as you bring up the quiz for us, it's in Menti, that if you see some of this and you're like, gosh, I disagree with that, then that's great. Today is not that discussion point today, but keep those comments and we'll, and then engage in a conversation afterwards as well. All right, so we haven't done a quiz in Menti before, so let's see how it goes. So you're all entering into the quiz now. I think you will get a little name, so I guess you know who you are. Let's see, the numbers are still going up. Let's keep waiting until the last numbers. Okay, we've got to about 40 or 41. Okay, I think people can still enter. Go on, let's start it now, yeah. So this first question, yeah, answer fast to get more points. So in thinking about impacts and dependencies on nature, a business should assess and prioritize species in protected areas, realms of nature potentially relevant to the business, all realms of nature. Okay. Oh, actually quite a bit of time for this. So actually, Maria, for the next one, you could actually start it as I start reading it out to save us a little bit of time. So yes, so hopefully you've got your answers in already. So yeah, when thinking about this is back to that assess and prioritize. 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Let's see what you all voted. Interesting. Good. All right. So most of you said all realms of nature, and that was my trick question. It's the realms of nature that are potentially relevant to the business. I think if we go into a company and say you have to measure against all realms of nature and all the dimensions of biodiversity, we're going to paralyze them. And I think this is great feedback we got from IPCA actually. And they said, can we caveat that and say potentially relevant to the business? Now, who decides? I think SBTN is a reference on this, but let's go in and say, here are the ones that are potentially relevant because of our sector, because of the company that we are, and they're the ones that we need to assess and then work through to prioritize. Okay, next. So this is on to building block 2 then. So, oh, the leaderboard. Oh, cool. I love it. Okay, so Bart C, you're in the lead. And Pingo Felipe. Felipe is at TNFD, Felipe. I'd expect nothing less. Great. Okay, let's move. Oh, I'm gonna love these quizzes. Okay, next. Okay, enter. And you can start it. Yeah, great. So what goals and targets should a company commit to? Let's see some of these answers. So minimize negative and maximize positive contributions. Could that be a goal? To be nature positive by 2030. What about ambitious science-informed goals to contribute to nature positive? So yeah, if you think about it, what if a company came to you now and said, well, what goals, what targets should I start, thinking about now? It's about minimizing and maximizing to be nature positive. So the majority of you got this one correct. My trick, actually, to say the minimize negative, maximize positive. That's a good starting point, actually. And I think most of our members at WBCC have these types of goals in place now. We want to avoid conversion free, for example, would be a good goal here. To be nature positive is a bit of a trick. Again, just what we were saying there earlier, given the complexities of our value chains, is it possible for a company on their own to be nature positive? Yeah, it's for discussion. But actually, if we talk about to contribute to nature positive and having those ambitious science-informed goals, that's where we should be aiming towards. So starting with that minimizing and getting towards ambitious. Okay, next. Oh, leaderboard, yeah. So Bart, see, now how do I know who's leading? Gosh. Oh, Pingu is still at the top. I remember that. And yeah, a Wolfmeister still in the top 10 as well there. Okay, great. Okay, well done, Belle, whoever you are. Next. We might whiz through the leaderboards, I think, Maria, for the next one. So what should a business do to measure and value their nature outcomes? So use one indicator for nature. Use a suite of validated, interrelated indicators. Put a price on nature. Now, have a think about this one. I was trying to give you clues as I was presenting earlier, but let's see. So use one indicator for nature, use a suite of validated, interrelated indicators, or put a price on nature. Okay, move on. Yeah, 2, 1. That was a trick question, wasn't it? Yes, thank you. Most of you got that one. Put a price on nature. I'd be interested, the two of you, did you do that serious answer? I don't know. I think, yeah, I think we often hear we need this dollar, but really, yeah, as we said earlier, the monetary piece only comes in very particular decision context, and mostly actually quantitative or qualitative is good enough. Okay, let's go. Can we whiz past? I know it's going to whiz around. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. we should do it for the last one then. Answer first. Okay, ready, next one. So what action framework can companies use to reduce pressures and have positive contributions within and beyond their operations? So I tried to give you some clues in the question, actually. Is it about avoid, reduce, restore, regenerate, and transform systems? Is it avoid, minimize, mitigate, offset with additional actions? Is that a good framework to use? What about a zero conversion of all natural habitats from 2020? So this was a trick question as well. Let's see if anybody fell for my trap. So yeah, most of you got this one correct. So yeah, this A3RT, I think is how we say it, the SBTN, built on the mitigation hierarchy, which is traditionally seen at the site level for biodiversity. So they're the terms in the middle to avoid, minimize, mitigate, offset. That's really a site level. And there still absolutely is a role for that mitigation hierarchy at site levels, but then think about project and company and business model and value chain, etc. Okay, next. I think that was our last one, actually. So yes, oh, we didn't see, it's fine. We don't need to see the leaderboard. It's fine. Go, go, go. Yeah. No. It's all right. Yeah, I just like said the time is flying. I'm sorry, Maria, to mess you about. What nature-related information should businesses get ready to disclose and report? So material impacts and dependencies on nature, all impacts and dependencies on nature, about governance, strategy, risk, and KPIs. Felipe should definitely get this one right from TNFD, I hope. And again, I see more people coming into the waiting room all the time, so you're welcome to join us. We're in the middle of a quiz. You're about to go to breakout rooms shortly. You're very welcome. So let's see if you got this one right. Aha, there was my trick question. So yeah, it's funny, I'm new to the world of disclosure and reporting, and so I've been learning a lot on this as well. And so yes, actually, a starting point, the stage framework that TNFD has, they talk about actually just even disclosing what are material impacts and dependencies on nature. So yes, that would be a good starting step. But ultimately, we want companies to disclose on their governance, the strategy systems they've got in place, their risk and KPIs, and not all impacts and dependencies on nature, because that's just, you know, paralyzing. We can't do that. So yes, that was my trick question as well. So let's see who the winner is. Very exciting. If you're the winner, please unmute and put on your video and say hi and what was the secret to your success. Who is Leia Ame? Unmute.
Hi, that's me.
Hi, Leia. What was the secret to your success? Congratulations.
Good listening.
Great listening. Oh, thank you. Well, I've just
a bit of
highlighted
background,
you,
I think.
giving you a virtual round of applause, and yeah, thank you for participating so well in that. And Maple Leaf Foods are in good hands. Great. Okay, so I'm going to go back to now we're going to breakout rooms now, and so now you get a chance to ask your questions. I am going to, in the interest of time, hope you can see my slides. So yeah, as we said, like, so for each of the building blocks, you can see they naturally start linking to some of the frameworks that are existing already, the clues, sometimes in the name of the acronym. So we have SBTN here, who are going to be speaking under assess and prioritize, and also act and transform, actually hot off the press. The global goal group is represented by WWF are here, talking about commit. Measure and value we have two experts, IUCN, Species Survival Commission, and the Capitals Coalition. Under ACT, so yeah, we've got SBTN, as I said, and Business for Nature, especially active in that sphere of the national and global policy, and Disclose and Report, TNFD. And so it's your chance to come in. You can hear a little bit, you're going to hear a couple of minutes about the initiative, and then bring your questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Somebody else has asked it before. We want to capture them so that the next people that ask those questions, they have the answers. And then also maybe share some of your challenges and opportunities. They are self-select breakout rooms. I imagine most of you haven't done this yet. And so you see in your Zoom menu, you've got something called breakouts. When we open them, you're going to be invited to join one, and you'll have the room and it will say 1, assess and prioritize, 2, commit, etc. You click on join. You then have to say yes, and then in you go. You're at any time, you can move to breakout rooms. If you're torn and you're like, oh my goodness, there's actually 2 or 3 that I want to go into, you can be what we call a butterfly. In the olden days, it would be in a room together. You could be a butterfly and you can flutter around. You then go back to breakout room icon, you hover over it, you select choose breakout room, and you simply go through again, select the one you want to go to, join, and in you go, and you can just join in. And they're expecting people to come in and out. You could also be a bee and just stay in and just, you know, stay and focus in that one. My dear experts, I think in the interest of time, I won't get you to say hello and the key questions you're dealing with, I'm afraid, and I hope that's okay with you. But you see everybody on the screen here now. So we've got Samantha McCrane from SBTN, then with Tom Williams from WBCC, we've got Gavin Edwards from WWF, we've got PJ Stevenson from the IUCN Species Survival Commission and University of Lausanne, Marta from the Capitals Coalition, so they're in room 3, measure and value. Room 4, act and transform, is Michael and Alain. Alain from SBTN, Michael from Business for Nature, and then Felipe from TNFD in room 5. I'm going to stay in the plenary. So if you've got questions for me, actually, then I will still be here. And other than that, I think you just got to go with it. You're going to have about 20 minutes. So it should be enough time to have a quick overview, reminder of that building block, the key references behind it that they're representing, and then bring your questions. We'll be capturing them so we can share them with you afterwards. And then otherwise, any questions, you stay in plenary and we can chat, but otherwise enjoy the breakout experience. So Tamara, thank you for your support behind the scenes. If you can launch them now. So hopefully you now see your breakout rooms. Think about which number you want to pick, and away you go. Good luck. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
And Tom, should I hand it over to you to do the quick intro and then take it away?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. I see a few more people coming in. Popular room. Thank you for joining us. So we are in the assess and the prioritize room. Hopefully you've got the building blocks document open to hand, because this is an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have, clarifications. Where do you need to look for further insight, methodologies, tools, etc. And really happy to have Samantha and the Science Based Targets Network with us today, because the Science Based Targets Network is, as you will all be aware, doing a lot of preliminary work leading up to the Science Based Targets for Nature being ready at the end of next year. We don't promise to have all the answers for today, but what we do want to do where we can't answer your questions is take those on and develop a bit of an FAQ, field of building blocks, that will be an iterative living document that we can update periodically over time. I wonder, Samantha, from your side, if it would be useful for the group just to introduce yourself, the Science Based Targets Network, what you're doing as it relates to the Science Based Targets for Nature, where you are and where you're heading, and perhaps some of the key tools that you are already developing as it relates to assess and prioritize.
Sure. So it sounds like a short question, but there's a lot of information tangled up in there. So I'm Samantha McCrane. I'm the technical coordinator at the Science Based Targets Network. If you haven't heard of us before, we are a coalition of, I believe, over 70 different consultancies, conservation organizations, and other business coalitions, all working together in order to try to create what we're calling methods, guidance, and tools, which companies, cities, and hopefully eventually also financial institutions can use in order to set science-based targets for nature. And when we say science-based targets for nature, we're talking about all potential nature-related issues, including land use and land use change, water use and other resource use. We also include climate change and contributions towards GHG emissions in that. We consider all different types of pollution, including air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, solid waste, and then other direct impacts on species and biological interferences are eventually topics that we'll be covering with science-based targets for nature. In terms of the work that we've been doing to date, last year we released our initial guidance for business. If you haven't had a chance to see that, I highly recommend you go to our website and check that out. Since releasing that, we've been working really closely on trying to develop further sort of technical supporting information that can sit along that initial guidance document and actually allow companies and those that are working with them to get started today with setting targets. Tom, remind me what else? Oh, you asked about what tools we're creating. So we're working on this supplementary sort of guidance material, as well as a couple of different tools. So one of the tools that we've been developing is the sectoral materiality tool, which companies can use in order to get a sort of like high level screening of which of those potential issue areas that science-based targets for nature will cover that they'll potentially need to be setting targets against. And so this is sort of a quick high level screening tool that companies that particularly have never done anything on sustainability today have been finding very useful. And then companies that are very large and are not really sure where to start can use in order to figure out what parts of their business are potentially the highest impact. In addition to this, we've also been developing what will eventually become a value chain review tool, but right now is very much more in terms of like data collection templates or a value chain review template, where we're trialing different ways in which companies can organize their value chain impact data and make this easily interpretable and use that for the prioritization process that's part of setting science-based targets. So that's all the work that I've been most closely connected to, but within the network as well, we're of course working on developing the actual methods that companies can use to set targets. And that work is led by our land hub, our water hub, our biodiversity hub, as well as our oceans hub. And then on climate, we of course always look to SBTI to be the experts and to integrate with us and bring their knowledge to bear. So that's a high level overview of everything that we've been working on. And yeah, looking forward to getting into a little bit more on assess and prioritize today, as this is really the cornerstone and the basic building block of getting started on science-based targets, as well as contributing towards a nature positive future.
Great. Samantha, you've managed to summarize the great breadth and depth of the work you're doing in a couple of minutes, which is fantastic. I see some questions coming in, so please do put them in the chat, or if you're happy to just unmute and speak away. But there is a question in the chat here, Samantha, about piloting SBT for nature tools. Are you doing that? How are you doing it? And how is it sort of feeding into the process at large?
Yep. So that is something that we are definitely doing. We do this in our sort of centralized corporate engagement program, of which we have over, I think, 100 different organizations participating. That includes individual companies, as well as consultancies, as well as business coalitions and financial institutions are all participating in this corporate engagement program. They have early access to guidance as and when it's available, as well as the sort of beta or alpha tools like the sectoral materiality tool and value chain review tool, which I described. And so those companies get sort of early eyes on the concepts behind those, are actually able to test and sort of play with the tools as they're available. And then, so that's all the sort of centralized testing that we do with companies and piloting. And then companies also have the ability to work directly with our hubs. And that's a more closed selection process, because we do have a sort of limited capacity in how many companies we can work with at any given time. So for instance, our water hub is currently working very closely with 3 different companies to test their pilot methods. And then they're working sort of more at an arm's length distance with, I think, at least another 10 companies who are independently trialing their methods. And then our other methods will be able to be trialed in a similar manner. So that's a quick overview of how we're working with companies.
Great, thanks, Samantha. And maybe just to tease out a few more questions or comments. One of the initiatives we've undertaken at WBCSD in the last few months or so, and Joris, my colleague on the call, has been part of this, is developing nature readiness assessments for over 50 of our member companies at WBCSD. So how are our member companies reporting against each of the building blocks that we've just seen? And what we found in terms of the assess and the prioritize piece, specifically looking at materiality assessments, we found that of the 4 realms, so biodiversity, freshwater, land, and oceans, it was freshwater that is most commonly defined as material and also prioritized as a material issued by companies. The realm which was least defined as material or prioritized was oceans. We get a sense that oceans is really a bit of a blind spot at the moment as it relates to corporates recognizing it as a material issue and prioritizing it. So it'd be interesting to see if there's any more thoughts on materiality assessments, experiences, observations, etc. A couple of questions coming in though. Let's come to those. And Jos, a link between the Science-Based Targets Network and the EU taxonomy. And from Michelle, have you looked at regenerative agriculture, defining it within the Science-Based Targets Network? So Samantha, maybe you could pick up those 2 if possible.
Sure. I'd also like to comment just on the oceans piece. One of the ways that we're thinking about impacts in the oceans is how they get there. So often impacts that are ending up in the oceans in terms of solid waste, as well as eutrophication, acidification, are actually caused by nutrient runoff that's on land or in freshwater systems. So that might be part of the reason why also the oceans is showing up as less material, because you're actually capturing that materiality further upstream. And then similarly with acidification, that's more of your greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the ocean sort of this final sink for other impacts and pressures which are occurring elsewhere. So that might be part of the reason why it's skewing. In terms of connections to the EU taxonomy, we're looking at that because they have done a lot of research which we can potentially pull on. One of the ways in which we're potentially going to be integrating some of their work is in these sort of high-risk commodity lists, which we're thinking about developing for SBTN, which can be given to companies as an additional way to prioritize parts of their business, and also can be part of the sort of validation criteria that SBTN puts in place to make sure that companies are doing enough and acting on the right types of impacts and parts of their business. So looking at the EU taxonomy in terms of the different ways that they're classifying activities which are of significance in terms of their ability to do harm or to do good, and trying to bring that into our definition of these high-risk commodities. And then could you repeat the second question? Sorry, Tom.
Yep, let me just go back to the chat. Regenerative agriculture, what kinds of discussions have you had within the network on this? Have you looked at defining it, for example, as it relates to the work you're doing?
Yep, so this is one of the topics that I try to stay away from because I can't cover everything, but I'll speak to it from what I have seen. In terms of regenerative agriculture, I'd say that the community is still working on figuring out what are the best ways in which to measure those outcomes. It's similar to the biodiversity discussions overall. What's the best final sort of outcome indicator, as well as what are the pieces that companies reporting and assessing are actually going to be able to control. So that's one of the key conversations we're having around regeneration. There's also been a lot of discussions around the difference between regeneration and restoration and reduction, with the difference between regeneration and restoration being that regeneration is happening in working lands that companies are actively on and managing, versus restoration is more sort of fallow land that's not being actively used, but that has potentially maybe seen harm in the past. The other connection there with regeneration is the connection to reduction, because in order to get those regenerative positive outcomes, you also need to be seeing probably reductions in pollution and in sort of disturbances of the ecosystems where you're operating. So again, that's not my particular area of expertise, but we do have a lot of discussions going on within the network in terms of how do we best manage this? How does it fit into the sort of overall action framework? What types of pressure categories or issue areas, target categories, can regeneration be used in relation to?
Great, thanks again, Samantha. And Daniel, I see your question in the comment, but maybe as I see you, go ahead, unmute and verbalize your question.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. As the question indicates, Anna Mundial, we work with the travel and tourism sector. Obviously a massive sector, and they have huge impacts, you know, on every level that we've been talking about. My question really is about prioritization. Where should the prioritization be? Is it the greatest impact, or is it the kind of many low-hanging fruit? I know what they would choose, but I'd love to hear your answer. Thanks.
So perfect timing to ask this question. We've just done a lot of work on prioritization. Our answer, of course, would be to focus where they are having the greatest impact, both in terms of the pressures, so how much they're contributing towards things like land use change, like pollution, like GHG emissions, you know, so what parts of your business have those highest parts of the pressure footprint, as well as if you're working with spatial or location specific data, which places where your company is operating or having those impacts is the most sort of at risk in terms of, if you're thinking about water scarcity, you know, where do you have the highest water scarcity? If you're talking about ecosystem integrity, where is ecosystem integrity either close to a sort of low end threshold or a high end threshold and needing to be protected or to be restored? So looking, you know, not just at what the company is doing in terms of those pressure impacts, but also in terms of what nature needs and where is the most important to act for nature. And this is really key for tying back to the whole nature positive narrative, because it's not just about, you know, what can the company do, what's easy for the company and how to control its own contributions towards these pressures, but really responding now to what nature needs. So yeah, that's the way that we think about it. Of course, you know, low hanging fruits, get started where you can today, but with an eye towards those being the sort of requirements or expectations that we would have on businesses.
So for a question from my side, data is important across all these building blocks, but particularly here in the assess and prioritize. What are you learning from some of the piloting or some of the early feedback, without going into too much detail, because this data is a big space that you could talk for hours about, but generally what are you hearing in terms of some of the gaps and challenges around data that is currently impeding some of the progress?
Yep. So one of the key things we hear from everybody is that it's just very difficult to get to that supply chain data. Direct operations, they can get it. But getting into the sort of supply chain, understanding just how a supply chain works is really complicated, even for technical experts, let alone, companies that are just starting their sustainability journey. So just understanding how to map out supply chain processes. And then once you've understood, how your supply chain works, how do you actually go, what's your information collection system? And then what's the information that you need to be asking for? But that's where we come in, is trying to give companies a very clear ask that they can go in there with. But it's really that supply chain, which is very difficult. And then similarly, understanding how downstream works. So just understanding how a company has impacts all throughout its operations and beyond that it's directly controlling and operating. And yeah, we find that for companies across the board, those that are mature and large, even if they've gotten started on this today, they might not have complete supply chain, or if they got started on this rather like 20 plus years ago, they still might not have complete supply chain visibility. So trying to listen to what is and isn't possible as well from companies, and sort of tailor what our guidance and expectations are, so that we're not creating guidance or expectations that are infeasible, but we do want to be pushing the bar and creating improvements throughout the entire field. And also mindful that the technology in this space is quickly evolving. So
And there's some really exciting stuff going on at WBCSD now in terms of supply chain data around climate. And it's not about the data per se, but it's about how you actually share that data within and amongst your supply chain, which could be completely relevant for the nature space as well. A couple more questions coming in, Samantha, from Maria. Is there any specific scheme to follow for the prioritization process? And then from Jos, transparency from companies on their supply chain should become mandatory, then the data problems are in the past. That will take a while there. So more of a comment there from Jos. On the prioritization process, Samantha, any specific schemes or approaches in place?
So we have been developing one. I cannot share it with you right now because it's currently under review by our technical experts, but that will be out publicly in May, and then it'll be out to the SBTN community in January. But yeah, we are going to be describing or suggesting a sort of prescriptive prioritization approach.
Fantastic. We've got 3 minutes left, so a couple of quick questions or one longer question I'm sure we can squeeze in. And I wonder, Samantha, if we don't have anyone forthcoming, but let's just give people time. You've already sort of teased a few things coming up, but maybe there's 1 or 2 key things in the next 6 months, maybe that you wanted just to bring up to the group in terms of keeping a lookout for any tools or methodologies. Hold that thought. There's one message coming in from Stein. Could you give a concrete example of how, for example, an agricultural business would go through this building block? So how would an agricultural business go through the assess and the prioritize building block? Anything from your side, Samantha?
Yeah, I don't know if I can go through it all in 3 minutes, but and I think it also depends on what this agricultural company is. You know, where are they in the supply chain? How large are they? Because there are 2 different sort of approaches that you can take. If you're doing assess and prioritize, you can do the sort of more prescriptive approach, which uses the sectoral materiality tool in order to identify which parts of your business, which potential pressure categories are most material, and then go out and do that value chain mapping. So looking upstream, looking at your direct operations, looking downstream. And again, the tools that you can use there, you can either follow the prescriptive approach and use tools and indicators that SBTN has sort of pre-selected and recommended, or you can use a more flexible approach suited to your business. Ideally, all along the way, we're trying to cut down as much time and effort that it's taking companies to get through this, but still looking to have a robust assessment of the company's overall footprint across the different pressure categories and parts of the business. And then you take that pressure information and then add your spatial data to it, and then take that into the prioritization step. Again, unfortunately, time-wise, don't have a lot of time to go into it, but we are, you asked Tom also for teasers. One of the things that we're going to be doing is releasing case studies in 2022, building off of the experience that a lot of different companies have done. And luckily, if the person asking this question is an agricultural company, we are getting a lot of inputs from agricultural companies. So you'll have a lot of examples that you can look at for step 1 as well as step 2.
Fantastic. Well, we've got about a minute to go, and I don't want to rush another question, but I do want to just show a moment of appreciation to Samantha because she agreed to join us quite late in terms of being part of this breakout. And Samantha, you've done a fantastic job, I think, enlightening the group on status, progress, tools, methodologies, etc. And I'm sure Samantha will be very happy to hear from you if you have any more comments or you want to engage more deeply in the Science-Based Targets Network. So thank you so much, Samantha, on behalf of everybody. Unless you have any final words or notifications for people, we can probably get back into the plenary.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And yeah, thank you for your team for supporting me as I took this on at the last minute. And I just want to say to all of those on the line, we are really trying to incorporate best practice and listen to practitioners about your experience. So yeah, please do share that with your WBCSD colleagues, and then they will be able to share that with us so that we can keep improving our guidance and methods and tools. So yeah, thank you so much.
We're being recorded as well. So yeah, thanks, Mariana. Are there other questions, or I can take that one first while people. Yeah, let me take that one first. And other people feel free to chip in with answers to some of these questions as well. It doesn't have to be me that's answering them. However, the one you've mentioned is, I mean, there's a couple of parts to what you said there, Mariana, is We only have interim guidance on SBTN. Companies that some GSK is one, and one or two others we've seen that have come out fairly early on with some ideas around nature positive. And the kind of a link to the second part of that is, how do you make claims in relation to nature positive as well? When the idea was originally conceptualized, it was actually put together firstly at a system level. What does the world need to do in its entirety? But actors, and then therefore, how can actors contribute to it? So one bit of fuzziness in there, which needs clarifying, is, can I be nature positive as a company, or am I contributing to a nature positive world? And I think there's still a bit of ambiguity around that. Incidentally, I think when the idea was developed, it wasn't completely developed, because it's important to co-create these ideas as well. And so this workshop today and the work of WBCSD is actually a part of that co-creation at the same time. And that co-creation is important because you get much greater ownership. The downside is you get this fuzziness that you're talking about now, where people are already somewhere jumping ahead, and it's not a rigid framework that's perfectly presented at this point. So coming back to the core of your question, and of course I'm answering this from a WLBF perspective, not from a WBCSD perspective in terms of the work I've been doing to help WBCSD. But from our perspective, well, first of all, we welcome any company or business coalition that is pioneering and helping answer these questions, because as they work through them, some of these foreseen or unforeseen challenges come up. So that is welcome. So we shouldn't be necessarily too critical of people taking that first initiative. We should be learning from it. Over time, though, we need some aggregate answers to these questions. I think they'll become easier to answer when we've got the full SBTN guidance available, which companies can apply, because a big part of Commit, this discussion today, relies on a more fuller framework rather than the interim guidance of SBTN. So there's an awful lot hanging on that. So I guess my short answer would be, we're happy to see companies pioneering. We're maybe slightly uneasy by some of the incongruity, but we hope that will sort itself out as more people grapple with how to apply the concept, and a big part of that is going to be using the building blocks that are being launched today. So it's kind of a messy answer in a messy world, Mariana. Rather, if you're looking for where to fit in your hierarchy or in your framework, I'm not really giving you a black and white answer. I'm giving you kind of a process of how do you build a multi-level, multi-company, multi-actor consensus around an idea so that it sticks. And that is really important, because there are many ideas out there, many platforms already. It's the consensus that sometimes eludes us on this, and that's what we're striving for. So I'm not sure if that helps.
Yes, very much. Thank you. I think we're also discovering, I used to work in the food and agriculture benchmark before transitioning to nature. And I guess that most of the indicators or most of the topics that we covered under that benchmark were more mature topics, where we had more black and white or more established metrics. And we're learning how to navigate this much more messy context of biodiversity, especially right now. Probably in a couple of years, we'll see a bit more clarity. But so it's good to see that we're not alone in feeling that way, and that we're all sort of moving in the same direction, which is a bit different on what happened with climate, that like everyone went in sort of different directions. It's good to see that biodiversity is sort of pushing for the same objectives.
Great, yeah. Messy, but let's have an aspiration to be less messy in the future and more neat. Any other thoughts on Commit? What does it mean? Do you feel equipped to go out and sell this idea to others?
I can maybe come in for a bit, because we're trying to do this at RSPB at the moment in terms of working our nature positive narrative into UK sectors. So we're working quite heavily with agriculture, forestry and built infrastructure around nature positive. And I think a lot of what we're coming up with is around the specific wording of nature positive, because I think it's been said before, in terms of committing, it's so hard to. So we're tossing around a lot of ideas at the moment about whether it's committing to be on a journey towards nature positive or committing to, you know, do very specific little actions on nature positive, rather, because I mean, I'm quite concerned that it will become a stamp that almost loses a little bit of credibility because it's just less bad for nature rather than actually something that's part of a system that becomes nature positive. So we're very conscious, I guess, of working out how we can work with businesses to kind of communicate the commitments quite clearly. It's not really a question, I guess it's just a statement of where we're at and recognizing how difficult it is at the moment. So but it's great to see, like, I think this is a really good area to be. I think the building blocks are really interesting and the guidance is really good. So hopefully there's lots of interactions around there.
Great. And maybe a question back to you then, Kim. I mean, do you think these building blocks are going to help you navigate that? So our worst fear is that nature positive just becomes another throwaway term that in 3 years' time is denigrated or out of favor. I mean, are the building blocks today going to help us keep the standard and the aspiration that we set out for?
I think so. I think it's about, so from our side at least, it's about getting very specific with them as well. So coincidentally, I mean, we've had a conversation with WBCSD, so hi again, Maria, about some of these areas. And I think from our perspective, we're looking, I mean, before the building blocks were launched, we had a very similar breakdown of principles that we were, you know, in terms of the assessment, commitment, measuring steps. And I think what we would like to do now is just make them very tangible for specific sectors. So what does assess actually mean for an agriculture farm, or what does it mean for a house to be nature positive? What do they need to be doing in under each of the steps of the building block? And I think just being a bit of a guide into a nature positive journey for the businesses is where I see the building blocks being really important, in terms of, yes, you're okay, you're in the assessment phase at the moment, how do we push you into the next one? If that makes sense. I think it is quite new, and I think the co-creation point that you made earlier is really important. I think the more businesses we can involve at this early stage, recognizing how complex it is, the better. But I am really interested in the commitment side of things, because we're still not sure what we're actually asking people to commit to, so it's very difficult.
Great. Yep, the real world answers, real world challenges we're grappling with. Yeah. What about 5 minutes left?
There is a
Renata?
question in the chat, Kevin.
Okay, Carolina. In case there's no answer, how does a company set sub-ambitions? Are there any guidelines? As nature positivity might be a bit ambiguous yet. And so similar to Kim's point, when you mean sub-ambitions, do you mean milestones towards some kind of a nature positive ambition, or?
Yeah, sorry, might be a bit unclear, but as you just explained, was that nature positivity is still like, we're looking still at companies who are leading in that, and maybe we alter it again. And if we now, I'm from a consultancy background, and if we now advise clients to go nature positive, might be a bold statement to say, okay, nature positivity by 2030, but what could be like sub-ambitions they could maybe go first at before tackling or like saying they're going to be nature positive?
Got it, yeah. So there is a separate piece of work that's sprouted up, actually driven by some folks in the UK. It's called Get Nature Positive. And when we first saw it, I looked a little bit nervously at it, because it was just a set of individual actions that actors could take. But then it was framed as, in the absence of a robust, holistic plan for a business, these are a bunch of no regrets actions that could be taken in the meantime for different sectors. So they put a website together. It's called Get Nature Positive, and that has some examples in it. I think that's good, because the actions that can be taken today, and some companies are already doing a fair amount of what's on the list. The negative side is that's just a starting point. It's not a holistic framework, but it's something to get folks started. So that's probably one useful resource. I think coming back to the larger question of, in the absence of full information, what do we do? Sometimes we like to say that in the climate sphere, it's clear and it's simpler. I don't think it always is that clear or that simple. In setting net zero targets in a world without offsetting, or in a world where offsetting is going to become increasingly narrow in terms of its applicability, companies have a real challenge there, and governments have a real challenge too. But they've set those targets anyway, and they work towards them, not always knowing exactly what they know what the first but next big steps are, but not necessarily every step. So that ambiguity is in here. In fact, when Nature Positive was developed, we had a discussion around what is necessary versus what is possible. And so it was really put together from the perspective of what is necessary, in the same way that a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway is articulated as what is necessary for climate. And then what is possible becomes a set of trade-offs economically and politically to be able to get there. So it's also a useful framing too, a bit uncomfortable for people that want absolute certainty of every step along the way, but a useful way to kind of respond to that ambiguity as well. It's necessary versus possible. And again, some people still say, is 1.5 degree really possible? It was an outcome in Glasgow. The Glasgow Pact says that. And some people still question, when you look at some of those crazy curves of emissions reductions, whether it is. But nevertheless, no one is abandoning the idea because it's necessary. So too for nature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Carolina. Renata, Jill, any last thoughts before we're teleported back?
No, Gavin, I just shared a link in the chat on the topic of the sub-ambitions that companies can be taking. And apologies if you've already mentioned this, but Science-Based Targets has interim targets in their guidance that are now live online, and those include links to some other frameworks and kind of standards that are being referenced by the technical teams that are working on science-based targets. So I guess the idea here is that if a company starts thinking about and framing things in this way, there are already sort of these sub-commitments they can start to make, for example, zero deforestation, referencing the accountability framework. And I think, that's obviously not the complete solution, not the complete package, but it at least gives companies a place to start.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jim.
We have 5 seconds, so we'll be transported very soon. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much, all. Look forward to seeing you in the plenary.
Hi, everyone. We invite you to put your cameras on. So this is supposed to be a small short group discussion. So if you feel comfortable to connect your cameras, that's fine. So I'm Marta Santamaria, Director of the Capitals Coalition. So the Capitals Coalition published a framework. There is the Natural Capital Protocol. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, to identify, measure, and value impacts and dependencies on natural capital. So that's why, although the protocol could help and is connected to all the 5 stages that Nadine has been explaining, today we are going to be focusing and deepening on the measurement and valuation bit. PJ, I don't know if you want to say some words before I can share a couple of slides to bring you all into the same page.
Why don't you start with your slides and I'll explain what I'm doing here.
Yeah, okay, great, excellent, good. So I had prepared a few slides. I will run you very quickly through them. Let me try to put this in if I can. Okay, good. So we use the Capitals approach is helping companies to really frame and understand the values of nature. And this is important to business because they need to understand the risk and opportunity. So any business is impacting and depending on natural capital. So what we are doing through the measurement and valuation is trying to understand those costs and benefits that are resulting from our impacts and dependencies, and how those are creating some risk and opportunities for business and helping them to manage them. So there was a bit of discussion already in the chat about if valuation is the same as pricing, and it's not the case. So there are different types of valuation. So we can focus on a qualitative valuation, understanding the high, the low importance of nature for people, for business. It could also be expressed in quantitative terms. For example, how much water we depend on, or it could be expressed in monetary terms, which is the value of that water that we depend on. So basically what we are doing through the valuation is recognizing that we depend on the values that nature provides to us, to the economies, to the livelihood of the communities in which we are operating, and in general to the human well-being. So we use the approach of measuring and valuing could be used for nature and for other capitals. So it would be the same for social, for human, or for produced capital. So basically what we are recognizing is that we have a stock of natural resources that combine to yield a flow of benefits, and that flow of benefits results and generates value to business and to society. And that is what we are trying to make visible through these approaches. So here is the approach to understand and to measure and value, both in the case that we are having an impact on nature, or on the right side, you can see the pathway for in the case that we depend on elements of natural capital. So in the case of that we are having an impact, we can focus on the left side. We can be having some impact drivers. It could be, for example, some pollution from a factory. And we have to understand how those drivers are changing the state of nature. So it could be a change, for example, on the quality of earth. And finally, the valuation comes in when we understand the relative importance of those changes on nature. So because of the poor air quality, there would be some consequences on the health of people. So when I was explaining that we can do a quantitative valuation, for example, it could be understanding which are the changes on the health of people. If we want to understand the value in monetary terms, we can apply some economic techniques to understand which is that value and express it in monetary units. In the case of the dependencies, if you focus on the right, as in the right side of the figure, it would be a similar approach. So we have 3 steps. First, we need to understand how much we depend on nature. It could be, for example, a coffee producer. So it's depending on pollination services. So the second step is to understand which are the changes on natural capital. So we need to understand which are the trends of the population of pollinators. So if the case is that those pollinators are decreasing, finally, we can value the impacts. It would be the impacts on business because they will have to use, for example, external pollination services, and that will have a value that we can express in different, it could be in monetary units, or it could be in other ways. So with this, I think that I gave you a bit of the flavor to open the discussion. And this is the approach that we are following about measurement and evaluation. I don't know if Pierre, you want to say some words?
Yeah, okay. So I think the idea was we each gave 2 minutes pitch on our respective systems. So Marta's talking a bit more about valuing nature. What we've been doing is more looking at what biodiversity means for companies. So we've been trying, so I'm with the IUCN Species Survival Commission and the University of Lausanne. I was one of the people that developed the IUCN guidelines for planning and monitoring corporate biodiversity performance. And in that, what we've basically tried to do is take decades of experience in conservation science and conservation practice and translate that into a business context. Because businesses, we are well aware, are still struggling. Biodiversity is everything from bacteria to blue whales, and people in the corporate sector still trying to get their head around what that means. So we've tried to unpack that, and we propose a 4-stage process, which isn't massively different to the other stages that are out there in other models as well. But the key is about assessing, again, pressures and dependencies on biodiversity. It's then about setting the right ambition levels. Then the key element, and the reason I'm in this group, is we then lay out how we propose companies use the pressure state response benefit indicator framework of linked scalable indicators to actually measure biodiversity that's relevant to them. And I think really just the key point to say here, I mean, following this methodology, the idea is that indicators are actually linked to goals and objectives. There's really no point in having a measure or a metric if it's not actually related to what you're trying to achieve. So, but having this whole full pressure state response benefit framework, as Nadine mentioned at the start, actually allows you to tell a story along a results chain, which can become your company's theory of change, and basically explains how the actions you're taking to help nature can lead to certain outputs, outcomes, and eventually impacts. So I'll leave it there for now, but we're basically, I think Marta and I are here to take your broad questions on measuring and valuing biodiversity. And I say biodiversity, don't get me started on this issue of treating nature as realms, because I totally disagree with that angle of this, but let's not get into that. Let's, when I say biodiversity, just take it as I'm saying nature.
Thank you, PJ. So I don't know if you have already some questions, if you would like to ask us specifically, or yeah, otherwise we will be asking to you. So Christian, I saw that you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, actually it's a question about the adverse effects that are caused by nature to human populations, to the human environment. And this is basically about pests, diseases, also floods or dry environments, which are requiring irrigation if it's to be used, for example, for agricultural purpose. And I'm wondering in how far these aspects are also captured in your framework, because what I'm also experiencing from my specific work is the area of trade-offs that we usually enter when we're going for the different dependencies on nature. So what do you use a specific piece of land for? Is it, for example, for agriculture? Is it for wild nature? Or is it something in between? So there are different opportunities or possibilities also in terms of biodiversity management, and especially when it's about the costs of nature that they're causing to societies, are they also captured in your framework?
So basically the definition of natural capital, we had a long discussion, internal discussion. So nature includes the elements of nature that could create positives and negative benefits. So the natural capital is just focusing on the part that is creating benefits. But it's true that the approach of measuring and valuing could help you to understand how elements of nature could help you to avoid the negative consequences. So for example, increasing the biodiversity could help you to control the spread of with the pest control techniques. So increasing, for example, the forestry or the coverage of an area with forest could prevent you from drought, the opposite of drought. Sorry, I don't find the word.
Yeah, so it's sort of flooding or
exactly
rainfall,
the flooding. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that's why with this approach you can understand how nature can help you to avoid those negative consequences. So that there are elements of increasing biodiversity and protecting nature that could help you to protect you from the negative consequences. So that is how it's integrated into the model.
And I think just to add to that, so I think deciding what to measure needs to be linked to part of the indicators, and the pressure indicators as part of the pressure state response benefit framework are actually looking at a company's potential pressures and threats to nature. And the whole idea of when you've already assessed at the beginning of your planning process what those pressures are likely to be, from that, once you've identified the most important pressures, the ones where you have an influence and are more likely to be important, you need to set a relevant indicator. And obviously, your objective is liable to revolve around reducing that pressure. And that's probably how your strategy will develop. But obviously, in some cases, if you don't realize that, then the adverse effects, if the indicator is going the wrong way, will still come up. And that's the whole point about having a good indicator system in place, because if you expect your actions to lead to a reduction in pressure, but you're seeing the pressure is not being reduced or is increasing, then you need to reflect on whether you're taking the right actions or whether there are other factors affecting nature that are unrelated to what you're doing. But so we often talk about measuring progress, but in doing that, you are also often, sometimes the indicators won't always go in the direction you want. So you do need to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Kristen. Unless anyone has other questions. Yes, Owen.
This is Owen here. Hi. So I work for Nestle. My question really is like, what level of granularity do we need to go down to? Because obviously we're a global food company, and you could arguably go right down to the field level, right, in each individual farm that you source from, but that's clearly not feasible, for us because of our footprint. And in addition, there isn't 100% traceability in agricultural supply chains. So how does it work with regards to sort of consolidated information for a particular sector, for example, the coffee industry? What level, what's the sort of expectation in terms of level of detail, I guess, is my question on assessing your impacts and dependencies on nature?
Yes, I think that has not been kind of decided yet. I think that it depends also on what is material to you. So based on the materiality analysis and as you said, the nature. So I think in your case, so some companies are focusing just on the operations because it's really important for them. I think that in a company like Nestle, probably you need to go to do an analysis on your value chain. And yeah, the level of detail probably you cannot reach to rigorous information at farm level. But I think that understanding at least which are the commodities, the areas in which you need to kind of take action, I think it would be relevant. So it's having a good understanding, is a good understanding to define the actions. And you will define the level of granularity based on, yes, on your understanding of the business and those kind of actions that you think that could help you to reduce the risk in your value chain. I don't know, it's still very open, but I think that, yeah, it depends on your understanding, your exposure to risk, and how that helps you to take decisions.
Yeah, and what we advocate is basically go down to the lowest level possible, which is obviously that's the sort of, everybody would say that, but it does vary. So if obviously for companies with one clear commodity or one clear supply chain, then it's easier. I mean, very few companies have just one, because even if you consider transport or packaging or so forth, it's often a bit more, but there can be. And then you can sometimes take it down, like you say, right down to the farm level. But even then, if you're sourcing from different countries, then the farms are going to be different countries, and therefore the nature will be slightly different in those countries as well. And so what we advocate is going down as far as you can. I mean, the biggest challenge is, I know some people say, well, we've got complicated supply chains from different countries. We don't know where some of our materials come from. But at the end of the day, I think, and this is the reality that is still sinking in with people about treating nature and biodiversity more seriously. If you do not know where some of your materials are coming from, you cannot say with confidence you are not having an impact on nature. And so the reality is that you have to at least find the supply chains that you can trace as far back as possible in order to start planning. And what we try and then advocate, because again, the other issue with biodiversity, it's not like carbon, it's not one entity, if you like. As I said before, it's everything between bacteria and blue whales. You need to try and see what it means for you. So it also depends what sort of habitats are the materials coming from, what sort of species are in those habitats. And then what we advocate is going down to as much detail as possible. So if you literally have a farm in one country that's sourcing in a habitat, I don't know, with savanna before or maybe forest before, then you kind of, it's quite easy. You can even probably name some of the species, some of the birds and mammals that would have been impacted. But most companies can't do that. But what they can do is go to higher levels. So they can say it's forest birds. They can say it's savanna mammals or whatever. And once you get that level of specificity, you can start seeing what it means for you. And of course, I'm well aware that not everybody sources from tropical locations. So you're not always going to get exotic things like orangutans to talk about in that context. But wherever the rubber hits the road with your work in nature, you need to try and tease apart what it means for you. But that is a challenge for some companies. And I do appreciate the likes of Nestle, where you have so many supply chains. And so what we're doing with companies in those contexts is saying, well, okay, we'll pick 2 or 3 of your key ones where you think you've really got the most impact on nature, and then really dig in those. And it might, in some cases, take a bit more work and a bit more research, but really dig down and follow those supply chains back. And of course, that is getting easier than it used to be. I'm not saying it is easy, but it is something we're all going to have to communally address in the near future if we're going to make this work.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everyone. Just letting you know that we have 2 minutes left, so maybe we can take the last questions. And then if there's no time to answer, we will have this document ready with all your questions. So also you can share them on the chat.
Okay, let's try to do it quickly. Warwick.
Hi. Thank you. And real apologies. I've only joined very, very late. So apologies if it's been asked before. But just on the, I guess, on the concept of defining the difference between a nature positive target and obviously the sort of measure and value that's applied to that, as opposed to a no net loss or a net gain target. And so, interestingly, you know, that's very much impact related, and so controlled in terms of what the company has over its area of, or its footprint or area of impact. And the question is, you know, are you looking at a slightly different approach to measure and value at a nature positive scale, which we see it at that sort of global corporate level, regional initiatives that are not necessarily related to the direct impact of an operation or a company? Be good to get a view. Thank you.
Rick, I'm not sure if I got the point of the question. So if the approach for nature positive would be the same as kind of the standard approaches that are used right now?
Yeah, so how different do you think the measure and value component is going to be between the metrics that we're trying to get for a net positive net gain versus a nature positive?
Okay, so I think in the case of net positive and net gain, I think it would be similar. So I think that the difference, it will be most of the companies are reporting right now in how they are driving a change, so an output or an impact driver, that is called. And I think that now with the nature positive, we are switching and putting the focus on how that is affecting nature. So maybe we are going to be seeing a transition in trying to understand the consequences of kind of the actions and the drivers of change from the companies. So we'll be progressing towards that. Thank you very much.
We have to go, but I'll just add for my 2 cents worth. I just say, yes, the principles need to be the same, Warwick. I mean, I think you need to set your goal. The indicators need to relate to that goal. And the key, of course, when you need to make sure it's positive is that you've got the right baseline. Because you won't know if it's positive unless you've got that baseline. But I would say in terms of identifying the indicator, it's going to be the same principles involved.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that mean we have to leave now?
Maybe, David, let's try.
I think so, yeah, but please go ahead, continue asking questions on the chat and we'll make sure that we collect those and have answers.
David, I saw your hand, so please ask it on the chat and we'll try and type an answer.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I guess we'll just have to wait a few minutes for everybody to be reallocated, and I will also be waiting for Alain to join. I'm not sure if Alain is already.
I'm here.
Here. Ah, great, awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hand over to you right away so we can get started.
Okay, assuming we have all those who wanted to join, and not expecting we might have more butterflies in between. So hello to all, Alain Vidal, Science-Based Targets Network. Quick reminder of what Act and Transform is about. In SBTN, we have actually added Transform to the mitigation hierarchy, which means that we invite companies to start by avoiding impacts, reducing pressures, and then restoring and regenerating. And then because all of that requires more than greenwashing, we also think, well, not only that it has to go beyond greenwashing, of course, but also it has to go beyond your own operation or even your value chain, but the environment in which you operate, meaning the sector, being an advocate for nature positive in your sector, in the regions where you operate with the governments. So that requires transformation of your business. Maybe one word about the difference between restoration and regeneration. Restoration applies more when you operate in areas where nature is almost intact or could recover. So typically you operate at the border of tropical forest. This is more about restoring ecosystems, or you operate in an area where you have a quite pristine system, could be oceans, could be wetlands, whatever. And regeneration actually is the positive, I would say, negative pressures in areas where nature is already imperiled, severely damaged, typically agricultural areas, urban areas, where actually you can't restore nature per se, but you can adopt regenerative practices that will actually restore some of the ecosystem functions to support your economic activity. I'll stop here and happy to entertain any question, Michael, and please put your video on when you want to speak. And we have what, less than 20 minutes for that Q&A, right, Michael?
Yeah, I think we currently have 16 minutes, so it's okay, great to open the floor for any questions around acting and transformation.
I'm too old for speed dating.
Hi, Pippa Howard here from FFI. Can I ask a question? Hi, thanks, Ellen. And just on the transform, there is this whole sort of concept of influence and engaging beyond just your own sort of footprint or your own direct activities into your supply chains. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit to that, because that's, I think, is quite a hard one to begin to know just how much responsibility should you have in that transform. It's transform sectors, transform sectoral initiatives, you know, so that it's almost like the scope 3 or 4 of nature, you know what I mean? So if you could talk a little bit to that.
No,
thank you.
You're right. Some of my colleagues, I heard some of my colleagues speaking of scope 4. I think part goes with the changes in regulatory processes. I remember a discussion with the flavors and fragrances company telling me that it was impossible to actually change the system around where they were sourcing the vanilla from, because the areas they were operating in was engaged in corruption mechanisms and so on. So it's how far can a company influence a policy in which in a country in which it operates to actually improve the governance of nature, or the bad governance that has a negative impact on nature. And I think some companies can, because some companies can say, well, guys, if you don't change that, we leave the country. So that's what I would think. We haven't really documented that yet at SBTN. This is more something that we are waiting for later stages too. But that's part of it. And it's also part of operating. And that's a big concern many companies raise. Like, if I move to a nature positive operation, if I reduce my impact, if I avoid operating there, my competitors will actually use the space I've left free. And so it's also how much you influence your competitors by showing the comparative advantage you have for your clients or customers by the best practices that you're improving. So it's really show what the value added from turning nature positive, rather than being very risk averse and saying, well, yeah, but if I do that, my competitor will benefit from the space I've left open. So in a way, it's really a mindset transformation. And of course, it's not only the sustainability people, it has to be the C-suite change.
Just a reflection, sorry, and I'll let someone else go in, and I just want to make sure that I understand. And so the mitigation hierarchy is very clear, and if you're doing NPI, it's very easy to know where you focus. But is there a sort of almost a prioritization or a hierarchy of activities that can be put in place within the transform component of this part of that? And also, can you use qualitative demonstration around reporting on that? Because very often a company will want to report on what they're doing, and they can't say they've got so many hectares. It might just be, we've been involved in engaging with X, Y, and Z companies, and the conversation is ongoing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you. That's a good question. I think we haven't gone very far to that, so I could just stay general. My personal opinion that would be non-committing for SBTN would be that qualitative reporting or something like that would make sense, because I can't imagine that a company alone could make a big change. But that would be about reporting what are the efforts that are made beyond the avoid, reduce, regenerate, and restore. That would help change that working environment.
I just wanted to quickly comment on the previous question around direct influence, and also just add on to what Alan was saying. I think working with your supply chain, your ecosystem is really important, but where Business for Nature also kind of plays and tries to address this issue is trying to influence the global policy landscape. And I think, for example, the CBD negotiations that are currently ongoing is a unique place where companies can then work at the global level to ensure that governments are really coming to the table and helping businesses in that regard. I think creating a place within the CBD that allows businesses the level playing field, like Alan was mentioning. If companies are worried that if I leave a space there, my competitors will take it. I think that is where regulation can come in to ensure that sectors, companies within different geographies are all playing by the same rules. And I think in that regard, we're able to trickle down those impacts. Good. I think the floor is open again for any follow-up questions.
Yes, I have a question. Just on, it was a very good quiz actually, where it asked the difference between the site level mitigation hierarchy measures and the correct answer for the nature positive approach. But just how would you describe simply to a company that relationship between NPI and perhaps a company that has existing NPI goals, and what the difference is with that move towards nature positive, and whether both are still valid as part of that? I ask because one of the companies that we're working with perhaps is starting to see NPI as a bit old news, whereas actually we are seeing it as still integral to the nature positive journey and the need to address their own impacts at the same time as looking for those greater, more ambitious opportunities than perhaps they would have done historically.
Could you please spell out NPI for everyone?
Sorry, Alan, I don't think we can hear you. Is it just me, or?
I couldn't hear, no.
Okay, could you please spell out NPI for everyone?
Net positive impact. So it's the site level avoid, minimize, restore, offset that's used towards the target of net positive impact on particular biodiversity features.
I'm not sure I have an answer to that question. I'm not sure I'm sensing the difference that is between the two trends that you're describing. I see it more as a continuum, which is pretty narrow these days. I don't see, or maybe you could dig a bit more or give an example for me to understand.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose, for example, say as part of financing requirements of the International Finance Corporation would have a net positive impact or a net gain requirement for impacts to critical habitats, and would be required to go through a quite rigorous methodology that's been accepted and as best practice and associated with achieving net positive impact. And so I guess it's working out whether that's still valid. So it's a site impacts a particular species or a particular type of habitat, and then sets those goals against that. But then nature positive is much broader, from my understanding of following the discussion today and previously, and is much more ambitious, but doesn't necessarily require the site to address the NPI in quite the same way. Maybe there's not maybe that's why the answer isn't clear, because it's a problem that's that
well,
I'm
I think I got your point now. Sorry for the second round, but that was useful for me to understand. I think what we try to encompass with nature positive is climate, land, biodiversity, water, and ocean. And so the risk with NPI is that you only focus on a given region or a given project or a given commodity, for example, for a given company. And you may not have the whole materiality assessment that would be needed to go to a nature positive approach. So the example I often take is like if you're a chocolate company, you could have a very nice NPI study for cocoa, but you are still missing what's the impact on the different elements of nature of your sugar, milk, nuts, almonds, and so on, which might be very, very impactful, but you haven't done it because you haven't been asked to do it. And so it might be that you're fine with your milk on nature, but you're on biodiversity, but you're not on climate, and so on and so forth. So that's really this materiality assessment, which we're covering in another group, is critical for actually assess and prioritize where the effort for the company has to be to reduce its impact and turn into a nature positive impact.
I see. I think it's integrated and nested is the key, and it's that how to help a company move from what they're currently doing into this new space. You know, after many years of working towards one direction, which I'm sure many companies will be grappling with and wanting to move in that direction. So that's really useful, thinking of the nuts and bolts.
Thanks both for taking that question. Do we have any follow-up questions?
I'm happy to follow up with a comment just related to that to some extent, and that is that we don't want to lose the progress that has been made around net gain and net positive impact with very localized, direct, operationally related impacts to biodiversity. But of course, framing that, and I think if it is, the way we would at FFI would explain nature positive would be that NPI is nested within the overall framework, but actually it's really about mainstreaming nature in a much broader sense, so that recognizing that nature is part of water management, nature is part of climate management, it's part of green infrastructure, all of those things, which I think has come through, but it is still confusing to those, because it's second nature for us, I guess, because we're thinking about it all the time, and I think it still comes to me to how it gets to be reported in the end. I guess that's happening in the disclosure discussion right now, reporting and disclosure. But I think the transform part is so amorphous in some senses, because it can be qualitative and quantitative, that you would want to transform using biodiversity officers, but you want to transform the sector, you want to transform landscapes, you want to transform people's thinking. So, it would be nice to think a little bit more about how we can navigate through this without losing some of the integrity of where the science has to really sit, and where the kind of thought management aspects can be reported. If we're thinking of the pressure state response type framework as well.
I mean, our experience is that once you've engaged on the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, assess and prioritize with companies, you are at grips with people in the companies who are really looking at the science and how that changes the technical approach of things. So I don't worry too much, as long as companies reconnect between their CEOs and those who are thinking of the transformation, I would say so, and those in the weeds working with farmers or with producers. Yeah. And I see a question from
I
Michelle.
think we have a hand raised from Michelle.
Hello, Ellen. Nice to see you again, or at least I can see you. You're not seeing me. That seems a bit unfair. You just mentioned the agriculture sector. So you know that Nutrien is in the agriculture sector. And I'm looking particularly at the increasing productivity of agricultural systems through regenerative agriculture in the transform space. I'm wondering how we're going to define those activities within regenerative agriculture. I think regenerative agriculture is more of a concept right now. And I understand from the previous group I was in that there's a challenge in understanding what the outcomes should be that are measurable from regenerative agriculture. Can you give some insights into how an agricultural company enters into this kind of journey of transform on regenerative agriculture?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, and good to reconnect. Well, I mean, a couple of reflections here on agriculture. First one probably is that a lot can be done through the previous steps on prioritizing and assessing where the highest materiality is, because I think it may differ from one company to another. And we should not neglect the fact that some companies are very complex, many different commodities, sourcing from more than 100 countries. So we realize it can be very complex for some companies. And in such case, we tend to invite them to focus on a region rather than on a commodity. Which in turn would come back to your initial question, which is how do we turn regenerative, what the outcomes are. I think those outcomes should look at the different realms of nature. So that would be climate. So you should have an agriculture that actually not only reduces emissions, but stores carbon in soil. It should be water positive, like it should reduce water withdrawals and reduce pesticides, nitrogen, phosphorus, fertilizers, too high load in water, and recognizing that in the global south, often more nutrients are needed to farm to support sufficient productivity. It would be about land and making sure that farming provides sufficient income for farmers to avoid them to expand and deforest or convert more natural land into farming. Yeah, I mean, that would be my three primary things. Fix your nutrient and pesticides, so reduce on that, and diversify your staple crops, because that's a good way to reduce, improve farmers' resilience, but also reduce many impacts. I mean, you probably know the study from, what's his name, from University of Minnesota. Okay, his name is out of my mind, but that's not far from where you are. David Tillman, that shows that with more than 15 staple crops in a country, you have the same resilience to the average crop yield.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining the breakout room, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present the TNFD. Today, I have prepared a couple of slides, but I don't think I have permission to share the screen. But this is more about a conversation around what we are up to. So I'm going to do just a very brief introduction about the TNFD, and we'll jump right into questions and discussion. So Felipe Arango is my name. I joined the TNFD Secretariat over a month ago. I'm responsible for leading our pilots works, but also currently supporting the Secretariat and the working groups of the task force in the development of the beta release of the TNFD framework that will be coming up early next year around March. So many of you perhaps are familiar with TCFD, and TCFD has been a very important initiative that has put climate related risks and opportunity at the center of corporate thinking, of corporate disclosures, but also at the center of the thinking and of the decisions made by financial institutions. TNFD builds from the momentum in the latest COP in terms of the protagonism that nature is rightfully getting, based mainly on the urgency of approaching, of halting nature loss and moving towards a nature positive scenario like Nadine was putting forward. Our mission is to create a disclosure recommendations and a management framework that can allow organizations and corporates and financial institutions to report and act on evolving nature-related risks and opportunity. And the big ambition here is to support a shift in global financial flows away from nature negative outcomes and towards nature positive outcomes. We believe the framework will be very useful for investors, for analysts, for companies, but also in a higher level of analysis for regulators, stock exchanges, and even accounting firms. We have a very strong mandate from the G20, from the G7, as well as from the Sustainable Markets Initiative, from the Terra Carta. And I want to finish by telling you a bit of how we are working as a task force. We were launched this summer in June, and we have a task force of 34 individuals from leading financial service institutions, corporates, and market intermediaries. But we also have a TNFD forum, which already has more than 250 organizations, and we would really invite you to join the forum, to be in contact with the TNFD Secretariat, access our knowledge, but also be part of the crowdfunding in terms of market needs and market knowledge. We are a market-driven initiative where the task force members are from corporations and financial institutions, but we are financed solely by governments. And finally, we also have a TNFD knowledge hub, where we are bringing in scientific research and market advisory firms as partners for knowledge generation, which include organizations like WCMC and IUCN, WWF, as well as the Capitals Coalition, SBTN, WWF, and others. We are co-chaired by David Craig, who is the former CEO and founder of Refinitiv, and Elizabeth Merma, who is the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And the idea is to put out, as I mentioned, in March, early next year, a beta release of both disclosure recommendations that will be very similar to what TCFD has done for climate, and we will build on TCFD, of course, making the necessary changes related to nature, but it also will have a management framework which will crystallize and synthesize some of the best guidance out there from the Capitals Coalition, from SBTN, from CDSB, and others, to provide a high-level entry point towards understanding and acting on nature-related risks and opportunities. And we will have 2 years of a piloting phase, where we also very much invite you and your organizations to join our piloting phase. We're taking an open innovation approach at TNFD in terms of putting in front of the market a prototype or a beta release for both the disclosure recommendations and the management framework, but to use these 2 years through piloting to better understand the expectations, challenges, and iterations required for an uptake of the disclosure recommendations in the future. So that's an introduction on my end. Please feel free to raise your hand and or to post your questions here in the chat. I think this one is for our working group. Jane Fiona asks, how are you measuring risk, nature value or cost of nature loss or other? So the first part to the response to that question, Jane, is The pillars of disclosure recommendations for TNFD will follow TCFD's pillars. There will be a pillar for governance, another for strategy, another for risk assessment, and another for targets and metrics. We are, as you can imagine, in the early stages of design, precisely on working around the disclosures for risk assessment and for risk management. And in the management framework that is being currently built in early stages, the question of measuring risk is definitely a complex one. There could be, and I think in line with what Nadine mentioned, various aspects of nature-related risks. Some of them are more, could lend themselves more to monetization through quantitative terms. For example, access to water and emerging transition risks around the water use, or even carbon plus credits, which could have a component of carbon and nature-based solutions linked to it. Those perhaps could be easier for an organization to measure and monetize. But other components of the risk assessment will not necessarily be around monetization evaluation. They could be based also on qualitative information, for example, around potential systemic changes to the business model based on emerging regulation around land use, or changing societal expectations around transparency in value chains and impacts around deforestation for a financial institution, for example. So some of those will be big level proxies as to the need for business model evolutions, but some of those risks will have different ways of assessment and monetization. It is different from climate, because climate is one risk or one aspect with the same impacts around the world. Nature will be more complex because it is place-based, and it is likely that organizations will have some risks across realms and across natural capital assets. I don't know.
Thank you, really helpful. My worry is that graph where we've got to stop nature loss now. So while we're all working out where the risk is, are we going to lose something that we need fundamentally? That's the reason for the question.
Indeed, indeed. And sometimes it's for some aspects, I've always liked the analogy, like it's like grabbing sand in your hand, that sometimes the tighter you close your hands, the more it falls through the cracks. So for some aspects, indeed, we're going to have to be comfortable with qualitative approaches towards risk assessment and risk management. But for others, where monetization helps comparability and helps a common language, we could definitely organizations could definitely go in that direction. What other component there is for financial institutions? This gets very complex, also because of the levels of aggregations. So what are the overall aggregated risks of a fund, or the aggregate level risks of a portfolio, or the aggregate level risks of an entire territory if you are universal holders? So definitely a lot of work in that respect moving forward, as to defining how risk assessment could work for corporates and for financial institutions. Cass asks, any thoughts on the level of risks that would need to be disclosed? For example, most of our risk is at site level, but would there be an expectation to report that risk at site, national, and corporate level? This is a great question, Cass. And the first thing I would say is we have a working group right now in the task force, very much focused around risk definitions of risks. So what could be some physical risks, some transition risks, some potential reputational risks, or so on. And there's different ways of approaching this from a corporation. Some of the potential impacts and dependencies towards nature will be site-based. So let's assume a food processing global brand, which has food processing plants all over the world. Of course, there will be impacts and dependencies related to the operations that happen on those plants. And it would be ideal that if for the sites with a particular framework, the scope of disclosure would grow gradually, in terms of perhaps focusing in a particular a territory that is water stressed initially, and then moving towards a regional or a global coverage. But there will be impacts as well that are very much value chain based. And their prioritization and materiality determination will also be very relevant, and to support organizations in going upstream or downstream in terms of their impacts, and also upstream, of course, in terms of their dependencies. Our disclosure standard will be at the organizational level, and in many respects, organizations will have to make that call as to whether the nature of their business or of their portfolio of investments perhaps could have different scoping. So I'm going to be reporting around this, which are the most material sites, or eventually I'm going to be disclosing about all of the sites. But in my value chains, I'm going to prioritize these two over the rest initially in my disclosure and in my management. So scoping and prioritization will definitely be a component around this. But the disclosure should happen at the organizational level. That does not mean that the framework could be useful for a particular bond offering. So assuming that there could be a bond offering for nature with a particular use of funds, then the framework could be relevant for that particular use of funds. But we're talking about the organizational level. Very important question from Sophia. How will TNFD relate or overlap to other initiatives like SBTN? This is fundamental for our work. And it is, we're not creating another standard. We want to crystallize both in terms of disclosure standards that are already out there, like the upcoming standard from ISSB in terms of IFRS, the work that IFRS, that integrated reporting has advanced, that SASB, that GRI, that CDP, that CDSB. We want to create a very high level entry point for disclosure recommendations that can synthesize and crystallize and crowdsource the best that is out there, so that it can be communicated in a very synthetic and comparable manner to financial institutions. But we are creating disclosure recommendations that will allow reporters that are already using a GRI or that are already using ISSB reporting guidelines to bring that into a TNFD report through cross-reference, but also for those that haven't yet started on any of those reporting paths to have disclosure recommendations. And the same thing we're doing for the management framework, where we're really working in partnership and in alignment with the Natural Capital Coalition and SBTN, as well as other approaches that will be developed out there. And again, very much in crystallizing and synthesizing to the market, but also providing links to those different approaches out there, so that we build from what is already in the market, and that we meet organizations where they are. Please unmute or type again in the chat if you need a bit more clarification. Shubhra, how similar TNFD reporting is to TCFD reporting for businesses? Also from a consultant's perspective, how can I start engaging my existing clients for TNFD disclosures? These are all very good questions. So we have already in our site 2 technical documents, Shubhra, in terms of the technical scope for TNFD, and a document called Nature in Scope. You can access this at tnfd.global. But as I mentioned, the task force is working intensely at this point to have, by March 2022, a beta release of an online portal that will allow users to interact and navigate both the disclosure recommendations and the management framework related to nature risks and opportunity. We are on the disclosure recommendations level. We are really aligning it in as much as possible with TCFD. This is language and wording from TCFD that already has great tractability, that has made it through financial institutions and through into central banks stress tests around climate. So we're trying to build as much from that framework. Of course, there are aspects that will need to be different for nature. Like, for example, what is the net zero for nature, or what are the scenarios that will that climate has used, and which are the scenarios that we will use for nature. So definitely some very interesting questions around whether scenarios should eventually be integrated, or whether transition plans should eventually be integrated. But we're in that process right now into understanding how the climate-nature nexus works. But what we can say is that organizations in the future, which could have perhaps one governance approach both to climate and nature, one strategic approach both to climate and nature, could eventually integrate TCFD and TNFD disclosures. So great alignment in that respect, and constant conversations amongst the two initiatives. I don't know how we're doing. I think we're almost running out of time, but I want to make sure if there's a follow-up question or a follow-up comment or anything else on my end that could be helpful. If there are none, I want to reinforce the invitation in terms of being through our website. You can become active as an organization in the TNFD forum, which is growing to maintain these lines of communication and of conversation around market needs and what TNFD will be creating. Also in the website, and by joining the forum, you can sign up to news on updates, which Jane is asking right now in the chat. And be very much aware, please, for the piloting phase. We are already starting to have conversations with organizations that are interested in piloting the beta release of the TNFD framework once we launch it early next year. And it's been a pleasure to meet you all, and looking forward to a continued discussion. Thank you, Sophia. Likewise.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got half of us here now. Some of the other breakout rooms are just shutting there. So just while we wait for everybody else to join us. If our expert folks are still there, I will come to you and just to give a sense of how the discussions went and what you'll be taking back to your respective initiatives. Is everybody back there now? Are all the breakout rooms closed?
Yep, everybody's back now.
Super, great. Okay, so we lost it. Oh, no. Here comes a load more people. I was thinking we had 80 something and now there was 50. There we go. All right, so let's go around and just very, very quickly just get a quick check from our leads and those discussions. How was that conversation for you? What are you going to be taking back to your different initiatives? So we'll go in numerical order. So Sam, how was it for you? 1 minute. Are you still with us, Sam?
I don't know if Sam made it back. I can't see her online. She might have got stuck, locked in the room. So maybe I can just chip in on her behalf. It was a really lively discussion, great contributions from the group, really getting some clarifications on how this connect to other existing initiatives like the EU taxonomy initiative, for example. What are the tools and methodologies currently available through the Science-Based Targets Network? What is coming up? How they're being used? What are some of the early inputs from the piloting that they've been doing in terms of data gaps, etc. So a really rich discussion, and thanks for Samantha for fielding all those questions and giving us all a lot more knowledge than we went into the discussion with.
Brilliant. Yeah, and Sam was a last minute welcome addition to the group. So yeah, no, thank you, Sam, and thanks, Tom, for stepping in there. So I heard lively and exciting. Gavin, how was your discussion?
Yep. Nadine?
We
Frozen,
lost
Nadine.
Nadine, I think.
It's too cold.
Please.
It's too cold in Switzerland.
She's frozen.
Please go ahead, Gavin.
Yeah, I'll jump in ahead. Thanks, Daniela. Also a good discussion. I mean, I think the challenge is how do you develop science-informed targets when, for example, Science-Based Targets Network full guidance is not yet available. Some companies are already developing nature-positive plans even before seeing these building blocks or before having that more of a robust framework to be able to move forward as well. So that is a real challenge. What do we think of that? And the answer is it is a little bit messy right now. Things will get clarified and come together. I think if companies are on the front foot, it's also a learning exercise as well. There's a co-creation going on here. So we shouldn't necessarily see it as a negative to be able to pursue this. It's something that can be welcome, but over time with a broader consensus around what are good nature positive approaches for companies will in fact emerge was more of the feeling for it. And then lastly, what can companies do in the meantime? What are there no regrets actions? And of course there are. SBTN has a good document on it. There's something out of the UK called Get Nature Positive. There are a few other things out there as well as companies develop these plans.
Okay, good. All right. Let's move to room 3. How are you feeling after your discussion? We don't need all the details now because I saw there was a lot, but yeah, just to get a sense of what the types of questions are coming up and what are you taking back?
Yeah, super likely also. We missed having some more time. So we were discussing about, as we are talking about nature positive, if we are also including the negative consequences of nature on these frameworks. If we were also discussing about which is the level of granularity and the level of detail, because if we are considering our value chain, so how far we have to go into detail. So very interesting question to be considered also. And a very good one about the difference of we have existing frameworks for sustainability for nature. So what are we bringing new when we are talking about nature positive? So also something relevant to consider for the next steps.
It's very short, Nadine.
Yeah. Go, PJ.
Very short. I think with 2 leads and each of us answered each question. I think everybody, there was more questions we could have got into, but it was, yeah, very interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Okay, and we had another duo in room 4, Act and Transform. And Michael, how was yours? We don't need all the details, but just give us a sense.
It's too short.
Always.
And I think we had good discussions about what transform means and what does that mean. And well, recognizing that as BTN, we haven't gone that far at that point. And how to preserve all the nature positive actions that some companies have already taken, which are more focused on biodiversity versus opening up to the other realms of nature, climate, land, biodiversity, water, ocean, and what does that mean for a company to go to that level. And also final question that I couldn't answer completely about how can we move into regenerative agriculture and what would be the expected outcomes in terms of influence on the different realms? So that's clearly something that we may have to rediscuss.
Michael, anything to add?
No, very succinctly covered by Alain. I think from a business for nature perspective, I think the question around the scope of influence within that transform pillar was very resounding. And I think, yeah, just seeing how far companies can go in terms of, value chain and ecosystem mobilization will be critical. And I think there were a lot of parallels drawn with also the climate scope 3, Alain mentioned scope 4 kind of conversation. So I think there is a lot of scope to really dive into this much more. And yeah, we need more time to get into a lot of the questions.
Okay. Oh my goodness, scope 4, that's a stupid question. I don't even know what scope 4 is. I'll have to come back to somebody on that to let me know what scope 4 is so we can also help others understand. And actually, yeah, the diving into transform, as we go into the sectoral roadmaps next year, that's going to be one of the fun ones to dive into. What does that transformation look like and what is a different role across the value chain in that? So looking forward to diving into that one. Last but absolutely not least, it's fundamental and cuts across all of them. Felipe, how was your discussion in number 5?
It was great, and thank you very much for the questions that were posed in the group. There were some really interesting questions around TNFD's alignment with other initiatives, and it was important to clarify that TNFD is not creating a disclosure a standard in itself, but is creating a framework that will crystallize and synthesize much of what is already out there in terms of disclosure standards, but also from a management framework perspective to nature-related risks and opportunity, that we will be doing the same with SBTN guidance on nature and the natural capital coalitions and work and other work from CDSB and others as it emerges. So that was really interesting to clarify that, but also our relationship to TCFD and the ambition for alignment in as much as possible from a disclosure recommendation perspective, mainly because of the tractability and the traction that language and the path that TCFD through climate has trailed around financial institutions and central banks and regulators. And also finally, an important question as to how to engage with TNFD. So there is the possibility to join the TNFD forum as an organization, and we very much invite you to tnfd.global to do that and to be very much aware for the piloting phase that will be happening with a beta release early March 2022. Yeah, we also wish we could have had more time.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. And actually, I mean, maybe we need to try to repeat this exercise again, but it was so great. I mean, the initiatives each have a particular piece of the puzzle that they're docking into, but of course they have to link to the other ones, right? So it's going to be perceived as overlaps, but the point is making sure we have alignment. And so it's actually great to have all of you here. I really appreciate it. I would say there's surely some of you who sat there like, if there's any burning questions that you didn't get time to ask in the group, why don't you throw them in the chat box? Because what we can do is we can add them into our document and come back to our experts and get those filled in. So if you've got any burning questions you didn't get to ask, throw them in the chat box, and then we'll go after our experts. And yes, I think on that note, if we were in a room together, and again, such a shame, we would have this massive round of applause now. So I just want to thank you, our experts, for taking the time, diving in to take those, and also our note takers from WBCC who were furiously, thank you, Enrique. Yeah, exactly. We could do the virtual, and Tom, yeah, it's not quite the same, is it? But and our WBCC note takers who are furiously taking notes behind the scenes, because yeah, at the end we want to have this resource. You've got these FAQs as well at the end. Okay, so we're going to move to the last part of the session now, and I really do mean that this practice makes perfect. So we now have a chance for you to speak yourself, like what nature positive means. And again, put yourself in a situation, you know it's going to happen if it hasn't happened already. Your boss comes to you, your colleague comes to you. What's nature positive then? As for a business, you know, what do I need to understand by nature positive? And so the way we're going to do this is you've all been learning and actively listening now. You're going to be put into pairs. So if you don't want to be put into a pair, you just need to leave your breakout room and come back into plenary. That's fine. Whatever the reason, we're not going to ask. And if you find yourself by yourself, don't worry, leave your breakout, come back, and then we can allocate with somebody who does want to practice. You're going to go into your group, do say a little hello, who are you? And then we probably don't have time 5 minutes, so your challenge is 4 minutes. Try to talk about, describe nature positive in 4 minutes. The other person, listen, time keep, let them know, you know, when they've nearly done, and then give feedback. So we probably don't have time for 2 minute feedback, but in 1 minute, you can give some good feedback in terms of what did they capture really well? Maybe what's an area they probably need to, like, you know, really nail and further improve. And I probably take feedback myself actually from earlier. And then any other suggestions. And so the idea is then, and then you swap. Okay, so the idea is that you've actually practiced for the first time, so then you're ready for the time that you're going to be asked about what nature positive is for business. And so Tamara is going to help us. She's going to put you into the breakouts now. So you're in pairs, introduce yourself, somebody go first. Just have a go. What is a global goal? What does it mean for business in a framework that business understands? And just have a go, see what you come up with. And then it's a learning experience, right? We're all on a learning journey. So enjoy. We have, for tomorrow, that group would be 4-4-1 with 10 minutes for that breakout, please, tomorrow. And I shall be here in plenary as well, in case there are still other questions. All right, enjoy, thank you.
Okay, so I'll open the breakouts.
So now, okay, so welcome back, those of you who are still with us at the end here. So I admittedly, I gave you Mission Impossible, talk about nature positive in 4 minutes. I don't know how you found the challenge. I've got my video open for everybody. You still got your videos on. Give me a thumbs up. Like, how did you do? Like, how was it? Did you manage? There's a really cool acronym that one of our members in Hancock told me, or sorry, now Manu Forest, he said SFD, it's a, well, I'm not going to say the first word, it's a swear word, and SFD is a something first draft. You just get the first one out there, that means the next one is going to be even better, right? Okay, so next, am I sharing my slides? I think. So in terms of next steps, we will be sharing this recording and we're going to pull together the Q&As as well. We're going to be diving into some of the details with our forestry member companies, with agriculture as well, built environment, and we're hoping to get to energy. That's still delayed. We want to kick that off later next year. And it's just like an invitation, like if you'd like to be involved in those sector roadmaps, if you think there's maybe something that you'd like to contribute or maybe some experience you can share as well, your ask is to contact Maria Anna Campos in the chat box, send her a private message, a direct message, and just let her know which ones you're interested in. We're tracking those, and then we'll try to find a way to engage you where it makes sense. And the other thing I wanted to flag as well is at the end of January, we're going to be releasing some insights. We looked at what our member companies are doing in WBCC on nature. We have a new membership criteria that our members need to have ambitious science-informed goals in place by the end of next year, or at least started the journey. And so we started mapping out that journey from started, developing, advanced, and leading. And here we've got like a snapshot, and you'll get this in the slides, but we want to give you the final version when it's ready. Well, it's like a checklist, and across those different realms and the different levels of like a basic and an intermediate and an advanced for those different building blocks. You know, what should you be looking out for? Like, what can you do internally, and what can you be reporting on? And so, yeah, that will be coming at the end of January, so you get a sense of, you know, the lessons and what we can see from our WBCC member companies. And then, but in terms of you, I mean, like, you have an important role to play here as well, right? As I said at the beginning, you are our champions for, you know, talking about nature positive with business as well. So I'd like to do some last Mentimeters. I'm going to be asking you what your biggest aha moment was today, and just how you might use the building blocks yourself, like to advance your business contributions to nature positive. And just, yeah, again, think about one particular idea. And then we're going to ask you that confidence question again now. So how confident are you feeling now after the session? So just, yeah, have a think. What was your main takeaway from today's session? And there's usually some kind of aha moment. For me, I remember at the beginning of the journey, for me, it was like the distinction between living and non-living. That kind of really helped me kind of see the biodiversity and the links with the different realms. Good graphics, nice, thank you. Co-creating is the way to go. Oh, I love it. Seriously, we could have paid a consultant to do this. Oh, go on mute, please not on mute now. Yeah, we could have paid a consultant, but, you know, again, nobody reads reports these days, right? We're just bombarded. There's so much to do, so much to read. And so, yeah, we wanted to develop it together, go on this learning journey together. Nice. Wrong answers in the quiz are the ways we learn more. Love it. Thank you. Good. All right. Okay, so there's a lot of comments on process here, actually, rather than the technical side, which again kind of validates our point that this is not just all about the technical side. I think at the end of the day, we're human beings trying our hardest with such a fast moving space. Like, nobody has all the answers. We're like, let's try and help each other and learn. And yeah, okay. Thank you. All right. Well, more process. Okay, next question then. What are you going to do with this now? Oh, there's lots of comments going in there. What are you going to do with this? Like, can you think of one particular action, one conversation you're going to have, one email maybe you're going to send, but like, just again, keep it advancing this, but how are you going to use these building blocks? You know, going back and speaking to your colleagues about it, sharing the slides with them and practicing, trying to talk to them about it. I think it'd be a great next step. What else could you do? The next time your bank is asking you questions, or your investors are asking questions about nature, Could you give them some tips of what you'd like them to ask you about? What else could you do? If you're working with companies, could you speak about this with one of your clients? I'd like some ideas, please. So there's some big ideas coming up. Ooh, other languages, like as in like, not just like business and government languages. Get in touch. That is a great idea. Can you send Maria a message or respond to our email? Because we could do that with some of our global network partners as well. Because it's not just about the translation, it's the getting those regional examples. I like that idea. Share with your supply chain. Very cool. Yeah, I saw in the breakout discussions that the biggest challenge at the moment is engagement down the supply chain. So, help them understand why you're asking these questions. Yeah, they are. I think I'm encouraged by exactly the building blocks. All these initiatives, they are complementary. They dock in at a particular building block, like the clue is in the name, like TNFD is really about that, disclosure and report, but it has to link to the other ones. And same for SBTN, science-based targets, setting goals and targets for nature. So they are logical. It's just, yeah, I think we all need to be reassured of that. Share on social media and blogs. We should be sharing on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, please look out for that. Yeah, and you're going to read the report. Brilliant. Okay, and then last one, in terms of how confident are you feeling now? Be nice if more of you could answer this, get your phones out. How are you feeling now? And this would be a nice one to end at the bottom of the hour here. Who else has got your phones open, please? Go to this last Menti question for you. I should have said, maybe the question should have been, are you feeling more confident or not? But it looks like it. There's nobody that's not confident anyway, which is quite a few of you this morning. So as a percentage, let's wait for more of these to come in. Okay, as these ones come in now, I think I'm just going to wrap up. It is past now as well. So just to thank you so much for kind of being here to the end. Yeah, we've been on a long journey. It's not finished yet. The idea is now that the building blocks are out there. We all need to use them to maintain the credibility of the term nature positive. We actually have fewer than 10 years to shift the needle on nature and climate and on the equity agendas. And if we get this wrong, we don't have time for another new term to come up. So let's get behind nature positive. Let's speak about it well and consistently. And then let's keep learning together. So we'll certainly have some opportunities, but I'm sure you do as well. So keep in touch, let us know what you're doing. And yeah, through the likes of Business for Nature as well, kind of pulling us all together, we can really start getting to, accelerating action. So yeah, just a big thank you to you for participating, the huge support team behind the scenes, so Tamara and Maria especially, our speakers, who probably some of them have left now already. And yeah, to keep it up. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So enjoy the Christmas or end of year break. And then we get ready for round 2 next year. But yeah, so thank you again. And I'll stay on for a few minutes if you want to check out as well and say hi. But thank you so much. Look out for a final email with our resources. And yeah, please stay in touch. Okay, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.